Hello, hello. I'm led to believe you can't actually see me. Unfortunately, I basically had to choose between good audio or video, so you're probably looking at like a still image of something right now. Anyway, I can no longer hold it inside. I must tell you about the novel that I read by this point, like a few weeks ago. It's Either or by Elif Batuman. That's what we're here to talk about today, and by God, we're going to talk about it. Okay, this novel is a sequel to The Idiot, which I read a while ago, a little over a year ago. And that book was really interesting. It was a very sort of like, it was a sort of slice of life book of this sort of intellectual college student. It took a really different approach from any other book that I have read. It's very I think it reminds me most of like Tolstoy, right? In that it is most interested in representing life as it actually exists and seeks to make very little changes to life overall. And I think that that is interesting because on the one hand, when Tolstoy does it, it has this feeling, this sort of vibe of like, oh, this is like, not only is this serious literature, this is like as serious as literature gets right here. But somehow when Elif Batuman does it, it feels much, much less serious. And I have a suspicion about why. Even as I am reading her works, even as I feel that they are less serious than those other works, I still have this suspicion about why it is that I feel that way. And the answer is because Tolstoy writes about big scary man stuff. He writes about like, ooh man, are we gonna get married? Are we gonna start a farm? Like what's going on, you know? We gotta I gotta really reconsider the role that my life is playing in blah blah blah, the Napoleonic War, etc. Whereas Elif Batuman, she prefers to write about much more like grounded contemporary things. She's written she's written now two novels about this lady who goes to Harvard and runs around thinking about things while she's at Harvard. And this is the second one. So this novel is It's I was gonna say that it's tough to read, but it's very, very easy to read. It's extremely readable. It reads like a New Yorker article. It reads like one of those New Yorker articles where someone basically gossips about their life, but it's like top tier gossip. This is an entire novel of that sort of feeling. And one of the many, many things that this novel is, one of the many questions that this novel is interested in, is the question of why we don't take those things more seriously, right? Like ostensibly, I mean, there was this whole literary movement that was like, we've got to take literature seriously, and literature's gotta reflect life, and it's called realism. And the most serious thing that you can do in literature is that you can try to reflect life. But apparently, if you do like too good of a job, and also if you do it in kind of a womany way, your novel ends up kind of sounding like gossip, and that's somehow really, really bad. So yeah, anyway, let's. I this is the only book I've ever read for this channel where I have like wanted to write notes before I do one of these videos. And yeah, I think we're gonna talk. I think we're gonna talk about why that is. But first of all, in my list, the first thing on my list is improvements from the previous novel, The Idiot. So one thing that I said about The Idiot was that The Idiot has this unfortunate quality of kind of implying a novel that is better than the novel that you are actually reading. I said that sometimes novels do this thing where even though they're really good, they suggest to your mind the possible hypothetical existence of a totally different novel that is much much better than what you actually have in front of you, and the idiot has that quality. The reason it has that quality is because the way that it works is that Salim, that's the main character, she gets to college, she starts doing college stuff, she starts running around, reading books, thinking about things, and I'm like, this is fucking awesome. This is actually like so sick. And she meets this cool girl named Svetlana, and Svetlana's from Serbia, and they talk about things. And Svetlana always says crazy things, and I'm like, whoa, Svetlana's so cool. I'm so excited for an entire book that's just this for like several hundred pages. And then suddenly Celine meets this fucking guy, and his name is Ivan, and he's extremely mediocre, and he annoys the fuck out of me. And then the whole rest of the book is about how Selim can't stop thinking about Yvonne. And the novel implies the existence of like, what if Selim just went to college, and what if she just ran around thinking about things, and there wasn't this Yvonne guy to ruin everything, right? And that is exactly the sequel that Elif Batuman has given us. Ivan is mentioned in this book, but he never actually makes an appearance in the book. He never shows up again. The end of the last book is Selim goes, bye bye, Ivan. I guess I'll never see you again. And she guesses correctly. She fucking never sees him again. There is an email exchange that happens between her and Ivan, but a part of that email exchange is that like somehow the spell is broken. I don't even really remember how it happens. It's a very important moment, but it's a very important moment like for the previous book. Do you know what I mean? It expresses this like strange feeling that I don't think I can remember another book expressing, of like, this is something that's happening to you that would have been really really important and really really major to the version of you that existed a year ago. But that guy's not here right now. The version of you that is actually having this experience actually just doesn't care that much. And that's what happens to Selim. She finally gets some degree of closure. The spell over Yvonne is actually broken because Yvonne does something stupid. He essentially he essentially tells her like, I don't even remember what he tells her, right? Like, the thing is, Yvonne matters so little by the time that this happens that I'm like, oh brother, finally the spell is broken, but I don't actually remember how it occurs. Okay, great. So the novel, as you quite possibly can already tell by the way that I'm talking about it, I think it could fairly be described as a plotless novel. It's another slice of life novel. The first novel was Selim's first year in college. The second novel is her second year in college. This begs the question: will there be four of these godforsaken novels? The answer that Elif Batuman has given us is no, there will not be. But who knows? You know, maybe a demon will possess her in the middle of the night, and she'll wake up in a cold sweat, and she'll have Selim on the brain, and she'll be like, "I have to write a third novel. I have to." Um, but I think this is probably the last one. I kind of hope it is. I've really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the last one, the first book, and I enjoyed the second one in this series even more. But I somehow just really really hope that there is not a third one. You know, if Elif Batuman tries to make me think about Salim again, it's going to make me very very sad, even if I like the book. Uh, Unless Salim does something really crazy, you know? Maybe if the third book is like, instead of Salim just coming back to Harvard and continuing her education, if Salim is like, I'm in the circus now. I've joined the circus. I would read that book. I would read the shit out of that book. But please, please, I don't know. There's something about it. Like, it's I feel like it's a very strange, it's at a very strange position for me because I'm happy to have gotten this sequel, and I really enjoyed it. Like, not even in a sort of like, oh, I'm being very critical and I'm blah blah blah. Like, I actually just really enjoyed this book. However, I feel bad that that's what happened, you know? Because I feel like I don't know. I feel it's hard for me to express why that's how I feel, but just the idea that like the first book is about a fucking Harvard student, like as if these are like the most interesting people in the world, and I actually did really enjoy it, which is even more intolerable to me than the idea that someone would write a book about like a Harvard student and look at her, isn't she so interesting? But what's even worse than that is a sequel in which basically we have the same premise, but it's just like it's a series now. And somehow the fact that the book was actually good and not at all annoying in the way that I imagined it might be does not make up for the fact that this concept like goes into my brain in a really really strange way. Okay, anyway, so this is it's a plotless novel. Nothing much happens. It is so realistic, in fact, that much like life, I feel like I would have to make notes in order to remember what actually happened in this novel, and I have made a few notes. So I think I think one thing that is really interesting is that um the novel, in achieving this fever dream of literary realism, it actually creates a lot of problems for itself that do not exist in other novels. One of them being, I just kind of am confused about what's going on. You know, like events just keep happening one after the other, and they don't necessarily like mean anything, right? We read novels because they mean something. And this novel's like, oh man, what if a novel didn't mean something? And it turns out that would make things really confusing all the time, just like in real life. The other thing that it does is it makes it really hard to remember what the fuck is happening. Plot lines begin, and you're like, oh, I wonder where this is going. And then they end because they weren't going anywhere, because that's just like real life. I also think that I'm conflicted, right? Because I talked earlier about how, like, this is a very serious literature brained, like, ooh, we're so serious type of project, for the realist movement in literature. And then somehow when Elif Batuman does it, it feels very silly, it feels a bit trivial. And I kind of want to split the difference. On the one hand, I want to give Elif Batuman some of the serious vibe of literary realism. Like what she's doing here, it's serious. It's real literature. But on the other hand, I also want to give some of the sort of like silly, like haha gossip vibe to Tolstoy, right? Like, bro literally wrote Anna Karenina. Like, it's that book basically is just what if I made up some gossip for you to read about? So I don't know. I feel conflicted. I feel like we need to split the difference here. Like maybe realism can be really serious at the same time that it's a fundamentally silly project. Okay, there we go. I figured it out. I've split the difference. I've squared the circle in my head. That is the answer. Realism, it's extremely serious, and it's so serious, in fact, that it loops back around and becomes very, very silly. Okay, the other thing that I want to say about the plotlessness of the novel is that it's surprisingly disturbing, and it's disturbing in a very particular way that other novels don't, like, rarely are, which is that you just kind of don't get closure for anything. Shit just like keeps fucking happening, and then you'll be like, "Oh man, that was fucked up," and Salim will be like, "Whoa, that was fucked up." Okay, anyway, I have to go to class now, and it's crazy. Like, there's a point in this novel where her one of her friends, like her roommate, I think, is raped, and she's like, okay, well, anyway, it's summer vacation now, so I'm leaving. And then it just gets dropped. It just never comes up again. And it's crazy. It's very disturbing. Okay, the next thing I have on my notes under the plotlessness of the novel is just feminism? Question mark? I don't know what I meant by that. I wrote these notes like almost a week ago. But just ponder. Feminism? Question mark. Okay, so the next thing is that uh, this is a novel that is in some ways about itself. Salim, the character in this novel, is interested in one day writing a novel, and she thinks that she might write a novel that is somewhat similar to the one that you are reading. So Salim is in the process of brainstorming and beginning to think about writing a novel about a student who, goes to Harvard. Basically, a novel based on her own life, right? And that is the novel that you are reading. It is based on Elif Batuman's experience of going to Harvard. So that's a very, very silly thing to do, right? Like, I hope that you at least share my contention that this is a silly project, even if it is at the same time very serious. However, you know, I mentioned in the last video about the previous book in the series that I find it really, really like exceptionally annoying when a protagonist or even like a minor character from a novel is themselves a novelist. But somehow Elif Batuman, she just like she's just endowed with superpowers. She has the sauce. She is such a good writer that she's allowed to get away with this. When your protagonist is a novelist, it sets my expectations really, really high for their ability to, like, I don't know, express a certain type of vibe or like say certain types of things. And yeah, I mean, I think it is often used as a shorthand for like, oh, this character's really deep. They like to think about things. Or even worse, it's used as a crutch for like, I can't possibly imagine a type of person that isn't basically like me. And I hate that. However, Salim is amazing. Salim reminds me of the type of person that I would want to hang out with. She honestly reminds me of myself, which is great. She has certain very uncommon thoughts, very uncommon thoughts that I have also had. Um, and this, I guess the thing is, this situation, the way that Salim is, the way that this novel does a handful of things that are like on paper really really annoying, but somehow in the book they actually just really really work. All of that is true of the previous book in the series. However, this book, that book is one in which Elif Batuman, I did a little bit of reading about how this book came about. She wrote it basically shortly after she had the experiences that served as the inspiration for that book, and then she just sort of squirreled it away, and she was kind of embarrassed about having even written it at all. And then eventually, like 10 years later, she was like, what do I have to be embarrassed about? This is actually a pretty great idea. She fixed it up a bit, and then she published a novel, right? The sequel was written like soon after that first novel was published, so well after the actual experiences that inspired it. And essentially, I can kind of feel that the first novel is a bit experimental, and that experiment works. And then in this novel, Elif Batuman, she's feeling herself. She knows that she has the biggest cock on the street, and she's strutting it. She's showing us she's showing us her big rider cock. Um, and yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of things that she does that are like even more on paper annoying, but in practice really, really work in this novel. And the main one is having the character think about basically the novel that she is in. So I said that one of the themes of the book, one of the sort of like main ideas of the book, is this question of like, why is this type of trivial gossip considered not worthy of literature when in fact it's very compatible with this realist literary movement, right? Somehow, and also somehow, like guys like Tolstoy can write novels about an affair, and that's like super serious literature. But then if you write something similar, if it just like smacks of, I don't know, woman stuff, somehow it just gets dismissed as like fundamentally not serious, right? Oh, you're navel gazing, like whatever. And it's not just that the book makes me think about that. It's that the book, in a sense, is about that. The novel is actually, in a very real way, about itself. Salim is clearly like turning around in her head the ideas that Elif Batuman turned around in her head that eventually resulted in the previous novel in the series. So this novel becomes self-referential in a way that is just fucking bizarre and like very weird. It's definitely worth, if you've already read The Idiot, it's definitely worth reading either or, just to have this unique experience of reading a book that is in some sense about itself. Okay. Um when the novel doesn't when the novel doesn't succeed in its goals. So like sometimes those things just kind of come together, right? And when they succeed, they work really really well. And when they don't succeed, they work very very poorly. And I want to talk about the difference between those two things because unfortunately, I think that it is largely a matter of uh personal, it's largely a matter of just like what types of things you want to hear people reflecting on. Because Salim, she reads a lot of books, she's really into Russian literature, she's really into like European literature generally. She reads those books, she thinks about them. While she's thinking about them, she walks around and she does things, and she sort of connects the things that are happening in her life to the things that she has been reading in the silly little books, right? And it's great. By the way, it also occurred to me that I think that this like connects to a theme in like literature writing. Yeah. Because I'm a literature teacher, right? And we essentially, at a certain point in high school, we teach students to write literature essays. And one of the things that we teach them is that when you're talking about a book, it's totally acceptable to just be like, this thing happened in the book and it made me think of this other unrelated thing. Like, that's an okay way to talk about books with your friends. But when you write a literature essay, you're not supposed to just be like, this thing happened in the book and it made me think of this other thing, right? Your second thought is supposed to somehow be like logically connected to the first one, right? You can't just be like, oh, these two things are kind of similar. Don't they look kind of similar? Like, you really wouldn't be allowed to write an essay in high school that's like, here's a thing that happened in The Great Gatsby, and it's similar to a thing that happened to my dad. Isn't that crazy? Uh, but nonetheless, that might be like an interesting thought to share. But we basically like beat that habit out of kids in high school. And then, by the way, in college, even though on paper you're supposed to not be doing stuff like that, in practice, in practice, I have noticed that people get really, really good at basically coming up with fancy ways to pretend that this thought of like, hey, I read a thing and it made me think of this other thing, is actually more like logical and sound than it actually is. Like we come up with these sophisticated methods of just being of basically just like making it sound like thinking of a second thing when you heard about a first thing is some sort of like sophisticated analytic method. And what I think is kind of interesting about this book, what I think is so lovely, is that it does some like strange literary analysis adjacent type thinking, but it completely dispenses with any of that like logical stuff, right? Celine will just be reading, and as she's reading, she will just encounter another thing, and it will make her think of something from the book, and then she'll just like ponder. She'll just think about the thing that she's read from the book in alongside the things that are happening in her real life, and that's lovely. I don't know. I just love it so much. I feel like describing it in the abstract makes it sound not so cool, but you're just gonna have to fucking trust me that it fucking rips. Okay, but that only really works if you're like a big book-brained, big nerd like me, especially if you particularly like Russian literature, because the thing is, this sort of requires that the sort of secondary material that Salim is reading be something that you're actually interested in, right? Like Salim basically does a literary analysis, like a fucking comparative essay of her life and the books that she's reading. And you have to be interested in both her life and the books she's reading. Otherwise, this just becomes completely boring. And there's one section where I got to experience what it must be like to 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 be someone who's not into this, right? Because there's one chapter where she just starts listening to some music, right? And she does the same shtick, but it's about like boring fuck ass music that from the 90s that I've never heard of. And she's like, "Oh man, doesn't this I don't know, doesn't this jazz make you think of blah blah blah?" And it was the most fucking boring shit ever, and I fucking absolutely hated it. And as I was reading it, I was like, "Whoa, this I first of all, I really hope this isn't what the rest of the book is going to be like. And second of all, this must be what it's like to read this book and not be like a Russian literature freak." And yeah, I fucking hated it. It was absolute ass. All right, moving on to point number 4. Oh yeah, bet you didn't know that there were points. Okay, point number 4. So I told you that this is a plotless book, and that's kind of true, but there's also one sort of like subplot that slowly begins to dominate the book until it eventually becomes very much until it becomes like the core of the book. And that subplot is about losing your virginity. This is something that was mentioned in the previous book. It's something that was talked about in the previous book. The character is like kind of doesn't get what the point of sex is, right? And she's curious. She's like, okay, one day I'm gonna have sex. There's a lot of discussion about how she would have had sex with Yvonne, but Yvonne didn't want to have sex with her, and that's like a very humiliating thing. It's not that she like propositioned the guy; she just sort of was around him in a way where she was like, "Oh man, if he tries to have sex with me, I'm gonna let him," and then he never did. Um, Okay, and in the second book, she's like, "Oh man, I would still have sex with Yvonne, but he's so far away." Anyway, time to forget about Yvonne, and she progressively like thinks about losing her virginity, right? Well, actually, at the beginning of the book, she's not particularly thinking about it. It's more so that her friends are thinking about it, and she is actually sort of horrified that her friends are becoming increasingly obsessed with their boyfriends and with having sex and so on. And it's like, oh my God, I had all of these interesting, cool friends, and slowly but surely they are becoming abducted by men. It's like the men are stealing her friends from her. And girl, that sucks. That's really lame. And um, one thing that I think is interesting is that this is sort of like precedented in the previous book. Oh man, this is really sad. Now that I'm thinking about this plot line, it's so sad. But in the first book, we've got Svetlana, right? And one of the first things that Svetlana says that alerts us to the fact that we are not dealing with a normal, run-of-the-mill cool character. We're dealing with a certified epic character. One of the first things that she says that lets us know that we're dealing with someone on that tier is that she starts just randomly, like apropos of nothing, she just starts musing about losing her virginity. She's like, one day I shall be pierced for the first time by a penis. And that penis, in all likelihood, is right here on Harvard University campus. And sometimes I just think about the penis, like, who has the penis? I wonder, what is the penis doing right now? Where can that penis be found at this very moment? Which is great. That's amazing. It's an amazing thought to have. It's an amazing thought to externalize into the world. It's great. And yes, Svetlana just has bangers like that all the time. That is the best one, but there are others, right? So anyway, this focus on like virginity is, at least in Svetlana's case, thoroughly precedented in the previous book. Eventually, Svetlana gets a boyfriend, and then she does lose her virginity. And Selim is sort of notices that basically, as Svetlana gets more invested in the life of this like boy who is her boyfriend now, the less that they spend time together. And then Svetlana just sort of like drifts away, and then she's out of the book. She doesn't. She just isn't a major character anymore, which sucks because Svetlana's fucking awesome. But I do have to say, I feel like it's a sort of tit for tat situation because in the previous book, what happened was we got Svetlana. I was like, whoa, this character is awesome. I hope we go Svetlana mode for the entire rest of this book. And then Selim just gets obsessed with this Ivan guy, and suddenly Svetlana's not so important anymore. It's Ivan all the time, even though Ivan's not very interesting and Svetlana's great. There's a brief hint at the idea that Svetlana and Selim might get together, but it is crushed by Svetlana. And by the way, that brief hint is then echoed in this book. They have a more in-depth conversation uh, that we will come back to later. They have a more in-depth conversation about homosexuality. But anyway, so I feel like this is sort of like Svetlana getting her revenge. Like, in the first book, Selim got obsessed with this random guy and didn't even have sex with him, and then that's what pulled them apart for a while. And now Svetlana is doing the same thing. So I don't know. I feel like it's precedented. Okay, anyway, so all her friends start losing their virginities. They start having sex, having boyfriends. And this is, by the way, like halfway into the novel. I like the plot starts materializing like more than 100 pages in. And I guess the thing is, it's a little bit misleading to call it a plot. Very much like in real life, I feel like this section of the novel has a plot in the same way that some periods of your life seem to have a plot. There's an overarching goal that you can use to sort of like organize the passage of time and think about your progress towards that goal. And for this period of Selim's life, that goal is losing her virginity. The first part is losing her virginity, and the second part is like fathoming the mysteries of heterosexual sexual relationships. So she loses her virginity. She hangs out with some boys. She does some like making out. It's funny how this project is described in a relatively like unsentimental way. I was interested. I feel like I kind of got tricked into reading a book about a young woman trying to lose her virginity, but I was interested. I was like, okay, I'm already really deep in the psychology of this Celine character. I'm feeling the way that she feels. I'm really like looking out through her eyes. So I guess I'm along for the ride to experience this project. It's like the adult the more like adult version of this project that I did when I was in like early high school, where I read some like girl books because I wanted to understand what women were like. I'm like, all right, that's that project that's coming all the way back. Now I'm gonna understand what older adult women are like. And yeah, it's pretty terrible, turns out. Turns out it fucking sucks. I don't know why, but I do, first of all, I found this whole project a little bit unnerving. Like, I guess part of it is that Salim has this mildly alienating and like I said, unsentimental approach where she's just like, this is my project, this is what I'm going for. All my friends have abandoned me so that they can get dick, so I guess that's my goal as well now. There are some descriptions that I found very strange. I guess strange is the way to put them. They're extremely explicit without being sexy in any way, while also being extremely sexual. That's the combo that we're going for. It's like it's like an extremely clinical description of a sexual experience, but it's told in the first person, so you get a very clear idea. It's very clearly conveyed to you that Salim is not having a good time because she's describing the events that are happening to her in a very clinical way. There's also probably the most graphic description of a penis I have ever read in literature, which is great. I love that. That's lovely for her. Going hard, just thinking real hard. I would love to, I don't know, reflect with Elif Batuman about what it must have been like to sit down and just think so hard about like how to describe a penis in such a way that it conveys the newness of the experience of seeing a penis. By the way, the whole rest of the video is going to be about this. Like the book takes a hard turn into being about sex and sexuality and heterosexuality in particular, and that is also what the rest of this video is going to be about. So you have been forewarned. I felt very like I don't know, bum rushed about this because the first book it has maybe like 5% hetero pessimist vibes, right? It has 5% hetero pessimist vibes. There's this Yvonne guy, he fucking sucks. I get the feeling that it's just Yvonne though, right? Like the problem is that she has fallen in love with this fucking schmuck and she can't get over him. And the problem is that she's stuck with her heart has stuck her to this mediocre fucking dude who is gonna like disappoint her and ruin her life and ruin this novel. And it sucks and I hated it. But this novel on the other hand, it sort of lures you in by being like, oh, that schmuck is gone. And then she starts thinking more and more about like heterosexuality and men and relationships and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is like a sort of more more contemplative, less disappointing version of this. And then boom, she's at parties, she's trying to have sex, and it's the worst. The hetero pessimist vibes suddenly get cranked up to like a solid 60-70%. I feel like it is useful context to know that Elif Batuman, despite evidently being attracted to men, has decided later in life to essentially give up men. No more men for her. She's a I think it's called a political lesbian. She has decided, or I don't know if she's a political lesbian. I think you have to have politics about it to do that. But she's given up men. In the same way that some people are vegetarian, she has given up men. Okay. So the other thing, the other thing is like as soon as she begins this losing her virginity project, I don't know, it just becomes a lot of like thinking about sex and sexuality in a much less abstract way. The start of the book you think about this stuff and the relation between men and women in a more abstract way. It's a topic in some of the novels that she's reading, and she uses those novels to reflect on Yvonne and whatnot. And then things get much more like concrete and messy because she starts like trying to trying to have sex with people. Okay, what I've written in my notes is men bad? Question mark. And that is definitely the feeling that I get from all of her early sexual experiences. There is so much bad sex. And like the pattern here, right, is that she has really bad sex. She loses her virginity in a kind of unhinged way, which is that she basically like sends an email to a guy that she like an acquaintance, someone that she like distantly knows, and she's like, "Hey, do you want to take my virginity?" And he's like, "Sure." And then they have the worst sex ever. And she's like, is this what sex is like? And he's like, no. No, it is not. This was fucking awful. This was the worst. Anyway, bye bye. See you later. And there's no like ongoing relationship between the two of them. Like they're not even really friends after that. They're just like people that see each other on campus, which sounds agonizing. It makes me very, very happy that I did not have any sex at all during college because it sounds fucking horrible to to just be like walking around campus and you're like, oh yeah, that's Dave. Lost my virginity to Dave. Anyway, and then you just make awkward eye contact and you just keep walking. Like that sounds like the fucking worst. So anyway, she has really horrible sex. There's a description afterwards where she's bleeding from her vagina from all the horrible losing her virginity experience, and then she goes to a party afterwards and she realizes that the blood from her bleeding freshly fucked vagina has dripped all the way down into the sole of her shoe, and that she's bled all the way down her leg into her sock, and it's now like filling her shoe. So at that point I was like, wow, she's gonna fucking die or something, right? Like that's really not how that's supposed to go, right? Um, but, this is a novel much like life. Salim ignores this problem, and then it starts to get worse, and I'm like, literary foreshadowing is a device, which, and basically expect that she's gonna, I don't know, get an infection and something really bad is gonna happen to her. And then, much like life, the foreshadowing turns out to be false. Nothing happens. It does, in fact, just get better on its own, and this shit never comes up again. And then she goes on to have even more bad sex. Oh boy, the rest of the novel is just bad sex from here on out. She has so much bad sex with men. It's seriously unclear to me if she likes any of it. I mean, she keeps having more of it, so I guess she likes it at least that much. But yeah. Um, her pleasure is very clearly secondary at best. There's a section early on in the book, not early on, but maybe like midway point before she starts having all the bad sex, that is about her jacking off. I loved that. That's great. I think we should have more literature that's about jacking off. But unfortunately, all the sections about her jacking off, it's just a prelude to the parts that are about her having sex. Once she starts having sex, there's no more jacking off sections. So, that's really unfortunate. By the way, I just want to take a pause. I just want to check in. This is fucking weird, right? Like this is so weird. It's so fucking weird that the previous book was so like intellectual and abstract and all that stuff. And then this book does something kind of crazy by just being like, no, you know what, this is like we're gonna do like Russian realism for the 21st century, all that like Pride and Prejudice type stuff, all that like thinking about relationships but we never actually get to the sex part. No, this is the 21st century. We have to describe the penis. We're gonna take this sort of like Tolstoy ass approach of like, ooh, what if I describe the thing in a way that fully makes us understand it. We're gonna take that approach to cock and balls. This sort of like, oh, what if we depicted life in such a way that it was so realistic. We're gonna do that, but for like the most absolutely wretched losing your virginity experience you could possibly fucking imagine. Short of like, I don't know, someone doing something violent. So yeah, that's really weird. I feel I hope you are understanding how like caught off guard I was by this, right? Because this is a very like, I don't know, it's a sophisticated book brain type book, and then all of a sudden it's just like, nah, dude, this book is about getting ass blasted. Like that's what we're gonna be doing, baby, for like 150 pages. It was very bemusing, but I also do want to convey that like these sort of like sophisticated thinking about things all the time mood does not go away when the book becomes about having sex all the time. As a matter of fact, one thing that I found really really interesting was later on there's one sexual experience that she has where this thing happens where like the entire like her sort of like analytical thinking about everything brain that she has when she's just going on through the world, it just like does not turn off at any point during the entire sexual experience. And yeah, I don't know, I thought that was a pretty cool way to describe being a certain type of person having sex. um Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is related to the sex topic, which is topic number 5. This is a novel about regressive gender ideas. Um, so Selim starts having sex, but actually, let's back up. Let's back up and talk about Svetlana. I've foreshadowed this. Oh yeah, the conversation she has about with Svetlana about homosexuality. She's like, Svetlana, have you ever considered that we could be gay? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to be gay? You and I being gay. Wouldn't that make our lives so much easier? And just like in the last book, I was like, hell yeah, girl, please go and be gay with Svetlana. That would be fucking awesome. And Svetlana's like, I don't know, I'm not really into that. I can't really imagine us doing anything other than like playing with each other's boobs. And Salim is like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I had in mind too. And then for some reason, I don't remember how it comes up, but someone says the line, uh, they talk about having sex with men. They're talking about having sex with men all of a sudden, and I think it's Svetlana who says the line penetrated and dominated. Penetrated and dominated. That's the way that she describes the process of having sex with someone who has a penis. Penetrated and dominated. And I thought when Svetlana said that, I'm like, all right, our introspective thinking about everything girl, she's gonna do her thing. She's gonna be like, oh, why do we have to assume that these assumptions? Why do we have to assume the assumptions? What if we can't we think about this in a totally different way? That's what she does for like fucking everything, right? But somehow this like penetrated and dominated thing, it really clicks with her. She's like, yeah, that is what a penis sex is like. When there's a penis involved, you get penetrated by the penis and dominated by the penis haver. That's what sex is. And at this point, she hasn't even like lost her virginity, right? So I was like kind of surprised and honestly a little bit disturbed that this was the only thing in the book that seems to just go unexamined. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of yucky. Anyway, hope that doesn't come up again. And oh boy, does it. Like within like an hour of that, I was sitting on the couch reading, and within like an hour of that, the whole fucking book is about getting penetrated and dominated nonstop. Um, so yeah, her way of looking at sex makes me very, very uncomfortable. Um, I am sure that when I wrote that in my notes, I had like a million examples in my head, but right now I can only really think of like her explicitly saying penetrated and dominated, and also just I don't know, it sort of suffuses the way that she does everything, right? And it also suffuses the way that she looks at men, which makes me especially uncomfortable. Like, uh, God, I wish I had done this video like a couple weeks ago when all this stuff was more fresh in my mind. But basically, like all of her interactions with men are like there's a significant tone shift once she like breaks the tab, right? Once she starts having sex, once she's in situations where she'll be talking to a man and she'll be like, I could have sex with this guy. It really changes the tone of like a lot of her interactions with men, and it changes that tone in a highly negative way. Like it sort of seems like everyone is always trying to have sex with her or making it clear that they're available to her, and she's sort of like analyzing and assessing them in a way that I felt was really 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 gross. I don't know, it made me uncomfortable. Maybe if I was better at reflecting, I would have something more interesting to say about what my emotional response was. But honestly, this is one of those situations where like I get to see the world through someone else's eyes, and part of what that's showing me is what it's like for a certain type of person to look at me, and oh boy, I really did not like that. Like the way that Salim looks at men, the idea of someone looking at me in that way, I don't know, it just really deeply deeply upset me. And the other thing is that it was made more upsetting. I guess I should like put some words behind it. It just becomes very like instrumentalized. She stops viewing them as it's not exactly that she stops viewing them as people, but she starts viewing them as um like there's something that she can get out of them, and she's a little bit curious about that, or not a little bit, like she's often quite a bit curious, quite a lot curious about that. She's just sort of like assessing them. She's like cock checking a lot of the men. And yeah, I don't quite know how to put my finger on it, but it was pretty disturbing for me. And um I don't know, the idea of someone looking at me in that way, it just made my fucking skin crawl. And also, at the same time, I felt like this was made much, much worse by the fact that I had now spent an entire book and a half getting really, really comfortable seeing the world through Salim's eyes, right? So I feel like I was sort of like lured into a false sense of security. I'm like, whoa, Salim is so cool, you know? If she were a person in real life, I would want her to be my friend. Um, and it turns out she has some very regressive beliefs about gender that would make that very, very difficult. So I don't know. It just I felt, I don't want to say betrayed, but I would say that this was like she expresses some very disturbing attitudes towards sex and gender, and they're made all the more disturbing by the fact that I have come to know her as a very like reflective person, someone who really, really thinks about things. And then there's this one thing where she just sort of like accepts this regressive idea that was handed to her by society, and she's like, yeah, no reason to really examine that all that much. And then she just puts it into practice by having some of the worst fucking sex, uh, uh just like abysmal sex. Okay, so that's her way of looking at sex, that's her way of looking at men. Now we gotta talk about the nice guys. There's a section from this book, like the previous one, I read this with my partner, and she said that when she got to this section, she said that it was like it was tailor written, tailor made just to like trigger me. And I agree with that characterization. Celine has this section where she's been having all of this like terrible sex with a guy with a bunch of guys who like um I don't want to say I mean I want to say they have a very like instrumental view of her as well, right? And she entertains the idea of trying to have sex with someone who doesn't look at her in that way. And I'm like, oh my God, is she gonna do it? Is she gonna like question her attitude towards sex and sexuality? Is she gonna have a positive sexual experience? And then she basically kind of dismisses the idea, right? She's like, no, no, no. The kind of guy, the kind of guy who doesn't behave in this sort of like swinish way. They're just not really that interested in me. And frankly, I'm not that interested in them. She essentially identifies the problem, which is that all of the men that she is having these experiences with, they have like unexamined and highly like patriarchal views of what sex is and the types of behaviors that you're supposed to undergo during sex, like the attitude that you're supposed to have, the things you're supposed to do, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, but I just can't get turned on if they're not like that. And at this point, I was just like, girl, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? It's so strange because everything else gets examined so much, and yet Salim is like, oh man, it sucks that when I have sex with all of these people who have these like regressive ideas about gender that don't really prioritize my pleasure, that I consistently have a bad time. Well, nothing to it but to do it some more, over and over again, a whole bunch. She does eventually have some nice sex, by the way. It does eventually happen, but not but not with any of these college guys. And yeah. So I don't know. Once again, I talked earlier about how like part of what made this part of the book feel uncomfortable for me is the idea of basically getting like lured into this false sense of security, looking at the world through Celine's eyes, and then kind of being forced. I mean, I wasn't forced. I guess I could have just put the novel down. I could have just been like, whatever, I don't want to read this anymore. But being expected to then look at basically myself through Celine's eyes as she's like, oh man, those guys over there, they're really gross, really unfuckable. Um, I don't know. I did not like that. Okay, the last thing we have to talk about is the chief nice guy of them all, right? This sort of nice guy idea, this um set of people, these men who do not have regressive ideas about gender, who like are more contemplative about these things. I would say they are exemplified by a character named Joey. Um, I don't know what we're supposed to think about Joey. There's a lot of things. There's a handful of things in this novel that are like said about Joey. Um, normally, what I would do if I were trying to figure out a character like this is I would piece together like basically a list of all of the things that are true about Joey, all the things that sort of happen to him, all the things that he says, blah blah blah, all that stuff. But I feel like that's an analytical method that is not appropriate to this novel. This novel is very lifelike, shit just kind of happens. Sometimes things are just true and they're not true for a particular reason. So I'm not sure that that is an appropriate method for Joey. But nonetheless, I'll go ahead and let you know what's true about him. So Joey, I might be mixing him up with another character, but I believe the way that this works is that one of Salim's friends is dating this really cool, epic writer guy, and she's worried that this cool, epic writer guy is out of her league and will break up with her. And so she's like, I'm gonna break up with him first. And I don't remember if she actually does break up with him first or if he ends up breaking up with her. But anyway, they're no longer together. And then Salim's friend is like, all right, time to go and get like cool writer guy Mark II. And the friend finds Joey. And Joey is described as being worse than every single way, right? Basically, he is like your bargain bin version of the boyfriend that she just had. So already, like once again, the theme of like seeing, looking at men through Salim's eyes just makes me uncomfortable. It just makes me feel bad. The idea of looking at a man in this like instrumental ass way where you're like assessing his worth in this particularly kind of, I don't know, it feels yucky. And it's an interesting type of yucky feeling because I imagine this is like similar or like at least adjacent to a kind of yucky feeling that women have all the time. This sort of like objectified view of Joey that's like, oh, well, he has these positive qualities, but he's like a 7 out of 10 instead of an 8 out of 10. Great. So Joey is just like a shit version of this previous guy. Basically, I thought when I read that, I'm like, wow, that sucks. I feel bad for this Joey guy. My impression of him up until the latter part of the novel is that like you're just supposed to hear about this guy and you're just supposed to be like, man, that sucks. Wouldn't that suck? Just being the diet soda version of someone else's like preferred partner that they can't have. Wouldn't that just suck? But anyway, after Salim starts having sex, Joey comes back into the picture. Salim starts taking creative writing classes, which is awesome. It was I would say a period where the navel gazingness of this novel really went into overdrive because I've taken creative writing classes in college and it fucking ripped to see them described in fiction. I don't know why. I just loved that so much. But anyway, Salim takes a creative writing class, right? And she's in a creative writing class with this Joey guy, and Joey writes a story. Keep in mind, this is well after Celine has started having sex. She started expressing these like uncritical, regressive ideas and putting them into practice and so on. And Joey writes this story about how he's a guy. It's a story about a guy who's losing his virginity. And I'm like, that's crazy. And Salim right away, she says she felt like there was something strange about the concept of about applying this concept of losing your virginity to a man, which I was like, okay, that's great. Love that for you, Salim. Um, lots to unpack there, but we just don't. Okay, you know what? You know what? Fuck you. We do have time. I think that this expresses the fancy term is phallogocentric view of sexuality. Losing your virginity. It's not about having sex for the first time. It's about being penetrated and dominated by the penis for the first time. So, actually, straight men they don't lose their virginity. That's not a real thing. The only people that lose their virginity are women and I guess gay men. Great. So anyway, so she says that she thinks this concept, applying the idea of losing your virginity to a man, it feels like there's something like strange about it. Anyway, in Joey's story, it's basically about this guy. He's having sex with his girlfriend for the first time, and he's on top and she's underneath, and she's kind of like going crazy. She's like, whoa, I'm really loving this experience. This is so great. Glad that we're losing our virginity. This is so awesome. And it's really clear in Joey's story that the man is sort of like the active participant and the woman is like the passive recipient, right? And the whole story is about what's going on in this guy's head as he's losing his virginity. And the thing that's going on in his head is that he is really jealous of his girlfriend, She gets to be the sort of like passive recipient of his active effort to make this sexual encounter happen. And he's like looking down at her and he's like really jealous. He's like, oh man, wish that were me. That would be awesome. And Salim, so this is, once again, I'm like, oh man, it's finally happening. Someone expresses a view of sex and sexuality that isn't just like, that isn't just like turbo normie ideas. That isn't just like the standard ones that you would get from watching movies and just like being raised in Western culture, but like cranked up to 11. And uh and yeah, Salim is pretty disturbed by this, as I guess I would expect. she sort of does some like mental gymnastics to sort of like compartmentalize this. She's like, no, 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 no. Like it can't be that like people think like that, right? This is not a thing that is typical. This is not a thing that is typical for people. Like this is just Joey. Joey's just a weird guy, right? So she sort of compartmentalizes that thought, and I'm like, okay, great, this is awesome. I'm really glad to see Elif Batuman sort of like challenging this character's way of thinking. I wonder where this is gonna go. And where it goes is that within so I listened to this as an audiobook, right? But within like 10 minutes of that happening, it is revealed that Joey is a rapist. He rapes Salim's roommate, her friend, and yeah, and then we just like never think about that character or his ideas or anything like that ever again. So yes, that is the part of this arc that I feel like was tailor made to trigger me. Once again, I feel the need to mention that this story, normally I would read that series of events, all of that put together, and I would try to draw some sort of like broad conclusion from it, right? Like as I was reading this, I was very tempted to be like, oh my God, is Elif Batuman some sort of like freak? Is she trying to say that the people who fail to have like regressive gender ideas are sexual predators? Like what, like is that what she's going for here? But I don't think that that's what she's saying at all. For a little while, I did seriously entertain that maybe she was the author's intent was something like that. But then I literally listened to it. It was actually really hard for me in the latter half of this novel not to infer like really, really bad things about Elif Batuman because of the way that she had written this autobiographical character to like think and say and act upon these ideas that I really strongly disagree with. And yeah, so I went on YouTube and I watched like a video interview with her. And honestly, it was kind of funny to see in myself how quickly I felt relieved with her just like coming on stage and just being a normal person for like 10 minutes. I was like, okay, Elif Batuman is not, as her character would put it, some kind of asshole. So I felt relieved that like, okay, this author is, I don't know, challenging me, trying to make me think about things in some way. I don't think that she's actually trying to. I don't think she's actually trying to put forward the idea that Salim's regressive ideas about gender and sexuality are like the correct ones. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway, that that plot arc really disturbed me. I think you can understand why it would really bother me that the first and last time that somebody expresses non-regressive gender ideas in a way that seems like it's going to be like a serious challenge to the protagonist, within like a couple of minutes, it's like, oh, that guy's a rapist. By the way, we're never thinking about this ever again. Also, this goes back to the thing I said almost an hour ago about how this sort of mirrors real life, and that there's absolutely like no closure at all. Like um, it actually reflects very poorly on Selim because her friend comes and like tells her the story about getting raped by Joey, and then the scene just ends, and Selim goes to Turkey, and we never hear from that friend ever again. Like Selim, the character, she really like kind of spirals. Like she loses her virginity, she starts having sex with these guys, and she does in fact actually change as a character and just becomes like, first of all, like a large number of her interactions from that point forward are with men, and they're like less interesting than the relationships that she's had with women in the past. Like I don't know, they have a different texture. They're sexual relationships, and even the non-sexual relationships are like charged with the potential of sex, but they're not as like intellectually stimulating. Like we never return to the heights of what it was like when Celine was just hanging out with Svetlana and just kind of talking to her. Instead, what we get instead of hanging out with Svetlana is like, I don't know, you want to try anal? And it's really just not a good replacement. It's not great. Uh, okay. The next thing I want to talk about is after the arc. It's not in my notes, but after the arc, look, this video is almost an hour long. I've got to find something to talk about so that I can release my first hour-long book reflection video. So anyway, after the part of the novel that is like her second school year at Harvard, she goes back to Turkey. And this was one of in the previous book, this was something that I found really interesting was when she goes back to Turkey. And this time there's like a similar attitude. There's a similar thing going on, right? Where she's a Turkish American, she speaks Turkish, she goes to Turkey, and it both feels like she's returning home and going to a foreign country, and I just found that really interesting. And this time it is added with the extra layer of her. Now she's like having sex with people, right? She doesn't just have sex with a bunch of college guys. She goes to Turkey and she starts having sex with a bunch of Turkish dudes as well. And some of them are pretty old, right? They're like much older than her. This is the first time that she has sex with she has like sexual experiences that it seems like she enjoys. She starts hooking up with this guy, basically this like kind of old man. I was thinking of him as really old, but then it turned out he was only in his like late 30s, early 40s. Basically like kind of tries to hook up with her, and she Salim shares a trait that I have, which is no ability to heed, like not the inability to detect, but the unwillingness to heed red flags in the moment. So she gets into this red flag experience where this like older Turkish man is like, "Hey, I'll help you out with this thing you want. And then how about afterwards? Maybe we go on a date." And she's like, "Sure." And not only does she accept the help, she also accepts the date. And not only does she accept the date, later when he's like, "Hey, do you want to like drive in my car to a secluded location?" She's like, "Sure." And then they have sex, and then it's not just that they have sex, it's that they like start a relationship, right? And it's not only that they start a relationship, it's that it's actually like quite a nice relationship. This is the only like positive heterosexual relationship of like any of these books. This is the most positive one, and it's also probably the, I would say, most like the closest to like a, how do I say this, like traditional hetero relationship. Like the guy clearly has some regressive ideas about gender. They have a bunch of sex. He keeps talking about how she's so beautiful and so young and blah blah blah. At one point she tries to suck his dick, and he's like, "No, don't do that. Islam says that you should never ever do that." And he makes her promise that she will never do that or try anal, and she's like, "Okay, I promise." And then later he tries to make her, he not make her, but he's like, "Hey, do you want to wear this the veil? Do you want to wear this headscarf?" And she's like, she tries it on, and she's like, sarcastically, she's like, "Wow, I look so good. I should just wear this all the time." And he's like, "Haha, fuck you. You can take it off." Um so yeah, there's this kind of like very strange but honestly kind of sweet, like sort of ridiculous age gap relationship that happens. It's, I would, in my opinion, like the only positive heterosexual relationship in the whole book, and there's a whole lot of them. And it's also something that, like, from the outside, like, if I saw these two people going around together and it was like, "Oh, those guys are dating," I would be like, "Yo, that's not good. Like, that's, you shouldn't be dating someone whose age is like yours times two. You know, you shouldn't be dating someone who's old enough to be your dad." But anyway, that's the positive. That's the, maybe that's just the zoomer in me showing. It's also really interesting. I don't know, if I wasn't so tired, maybe I would try to figure out what this means. But it's really interesting that she has all of these horrible experiences with guys that are her own age, that are like ostensibly culturally much like closer to where she's at. All these dudes from Harvard just keep like giving her like the worst pipe of her fucking life, right? And it's partially rooted in these like regressive gender ideas. And then she goes to Turkey and she meets this guy who's like, seems like he's going to be even worse, right? Like he's much older than those guys. They had regressive gender ideas in a sort of like abstract, this is what's in the air sense, and this guy has regressive gender ideas in a more like explicit sense, right? Like he believes things that these dudes from Harvard don't believe. Like he thinks that like if you do a blowjob, you're like damaging your soul, right? And nonetheless, that's like this the sweet relationship that she has. I don't know. There's something about that that is interesting and possibly a little yucky. Do you see why I was worried that Elif Batuman was some kind of freak, right? Like I was worried that the author is trying to convey that like you have to have regressive gender ideas, otherwise you're some kind of degenerate like Joey. It's certainly a reading of the novel that jumped out to me as the obvious one. I think the novel expects me as a reader to be more reflective about these things. than that, and certainly I am more reflective than that. But it did really disturb me that the obvious interpretation of these events that jumps out is like such a gross one. Okay, anyway, let's. Oh yeah. By the way, after that, she has more sexual experiences with more Turkish guys, and they're even worse. And I keep expecting there to be some sort of like conclusion, right? For her to have some thought about this, and then there just isn't. Like the conclusion. The conclusion. It's interesting. It actually, after an entire half of the book that's just about like having lots of sex, um, the book suddenly concludes with something totally different, which is that she goes to Russia. It's interesting that she's going during the like 90s collapse, right? The Soviet Union is over, I believe, and she goes to Russia and she's like, "Wow, look at me! I'm so impressive. I've made myself into the type of person who can go to Russia and can do a job that requires knowing Russian." So it's this sort of like progression that she's gone through. Also, another thing here at the end, I do want to note there are things that happen in the second half of the book that aren't just her like fucking, but uh, they are all like pretty closely related to that. Like it's a lot of like thinking about what does it mean to be in a heterosexual relationship? And that question comes to become like a much more uncomfortable one after she starts having sex. It starts to like have teeth in a way that made me feel absolutely awful. Honestly, like to be honest, I found this book very fascinating. I thought about it a whole lot, but the back like 2/3 of this book, it felt like self-harm that I was continuing to read this shit. Um, okay, great. Here are my concluding remarks. Um, so what I've written is that I think that this novel expresses a new way of viewing life, a different way of viewing life, one that I think is exemplified by Salim, both in its positives and in its negatives. And that new way of viewing life is basically as an extension of literature. Salim views it as her responsibility to become very, very interesting so that she can go on and write good novels. And she like reads her books and she understands her life in terms of her books and she understands her books in terms of her life. Like the two constitute a contiguous tapestry. And she also talks about how she's sort of been convinced, she's been told all of her life that the things that constitute her like innermost world, these are simply not very serious and they're not a topic for serious contemplation. But then when she starts reading college literature, she starts to question that and she starts to view this differently, that like maybe her innermost thoughts are a topic for serious contemplation. And I do think this parallels the progression that Elif Batuman had to go through in order to write this novel, where she wrote a very like navel gazing novel and basically got embarrassed and put it away for 10 years. And then she took it out and she was like, hey, what's wrong with gazing at your navel? Especially if your navel is fantastic. Personally, I think Salim's navel is not all that unique, but that's part of what makes this exciting, right? Is that Salim is not all that special of a person, but like through sheer expressive capability, you can display the like inner world of someone who is not even all that special, and it becomes very, very interesting. And I think that's pretty great. The other thing is, I said this before, but I want to reiterate this story that I had about watching an interview from Elif Batuman and realizing that she is not, as her character would say, some sort of asshole. It put my poor little heart at ease to find out that Elif Batuman is not some kind of asshole, because I don't know, I just felt very betrayed by this novel that it suddenly pivoted from being this sort of like open-ended exploration in a way that felt very, very like safe. I don't know if safe is the right word. I think that is the right word actually. It felt very safe. The type of exploration it was doing. We were reading this literature that is in some sense about sex, but is really more about like love and relationships. And we were thinking about love and relationships in Salim's life, which in a sense is like kind of about sex, but not really. And then we suddenly pivot from that to like describing the penis and thinking about penetration and domination, and it just felt very like I don't know, gross. And so I'm really glad. I wish that I could go back in time and just reassure myself before I got into that. Like just have a conversation with myself and be like, look, the author is not some kind of asshole. They're not trying to convince you of some sort of like regressive. They're not trying to make some sort of regressive point. I don't know. Maybe I just have trauma from reading too much radical feminism as a teenager. Okay. The last thing I wanted to say is on this topic of like being interesting, right? Because I think this book is very interesting, and I think that it does not mobilize being interesting to make one cohesive point, which is perhaps why it was perhaps part of why it's so interesting. So um I don't have a great answer to this one, but the question that is most brought to mind by the process of just contemplating this book is this question of whether or not you have an obligation when you are capable of being interesting to be interesting about something that is like worth thinking about, right? Because something being interesting is essentially a way of saying that it's something that provokes thought. It's something that causes you to like focus your attention on that. Like you want to attend to that thing. And Elif Batuman has this amazing ability to make something interesting even when it sort of doesn't have this inherent interest, right? And one of the many questions, the one that I want to kind of end on, is this question of whether or not there is an obligation when you have that ability, or if there is a not obligation, but if you have like some kind of responsibility to be interesting for a purpose. Because I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. Before reading this novel, I would have said yes. I would have said that it's kind of just a waste of everybody's time to generate something that is interesting only, and I don't just mean attention getting, right? Like there are some things that are attention getting that are obviously not worth your time. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just click on the shorts tab and you'll see plenty of things that are attention getting without even really being that interesting. Those are not worth your time. But I guess the thing is, if something is interesting, if something is like, oh wow, I really am encouraged to think about that. I want to think about that. Is that a morally neutral thing? That's the thought that I have about this, right? And before reading this book, I think I kind of would have said that you haven't that it's at least better to try to be interesting about something that is like worth thinking about. But having read this book, I don't know. I am unsettled in my opinion. I've gone from thinking that it's definitely true that if you're capable of being interesting, you have an obligation to be interesting about something important. Uh, but now I don't know. Now I'm not so sure because the thing is like if I had described this book to myself, that it's just like a slice of life book and it just has lots of little things in it that you're just gonna go, I would have said, well, that's a waste of time, like, does it express some new philosophy towards life? Uh, maybe, kinda, I don't know, but not really. Um, does it reveal something that you didn't know before? I don't know, maybe a little bit. It reveals what it's like to be a totally different person. Um, but mostly it's just interesting, there's just a bunch of stuff in here that you read. It's like it sort of is like gossip. It just makes you go, hmm, interesting. And before I would have thought that is not good, that it's preferable to try to be interesting about something that's like more serious. But now, I don't know. I guess I've gone from thinking that something being interesting is morally neutral to thinking that something being interesting is perhaps a slight moral positive, And I don't just mean attention getting, right? Like I mean interesting as in like you want to and you feel like a little bit gratified by thinking about something. I think Elif Batuman has convinced me that at least to some small degree, just being interesting is enough for something to be valuable. Just the mere fact that people look at it and think, I want to think about that is enough for something to have been worth thinking about. Okay, I think I have conclusively demonstrated that I am in fact capable of rambling about this book for fucking ever, but eventually all things must come to an end, and I, alas, must go to bed now. So, that's it. That's either or. If you too wish to be brain broken by this fucking book, go out and read The Idiot first, and then read either or. Okay, I'm actually really excited for Elif Batuman's future projects. I'm really excited to see what she writes when it's not like when it's not about Celine. Like, I'm really excited to see her take on a project that isn't this, but more of it. Okay, that's all for me. Bye bye.